Welcome back to SEEK Bytes, a podcast for software engineers by software engineers. On this episode, we are talking about a 15-year-old hacker who found an exploit in Zendesk and walked away with over $50,000 in bug bounty. But it's a little bit controversial. Stay tuned why. This episode, we are talking about something that I found. It was an article. It was actually a gist. Is that what you call them? GitHub gists?
Yeah,
gist.
gist.
Yeah, I think it's a gist. Yeah.
What's the gist?
What's the gist? This is about a programmer who does bug bounties, and he found a vulnerability in Zendesk. Who initially they didn't catch it, and so he ended up reaching out to other companies and making about $50,000+ on this bug bounty in not the way you would expect to. So we're going to cover this as a really interesting topic. So let's just jump right in. So I'm going to pretty much read from most of this verbatim as what's on here. So to start, does anyone have his handle?
Yeah. So HackerMonDev.
There we go. That's the GitHub handle of this guy. He says, "Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a 15-year-old with some programming experience, and I do a little bug hunting on my free time. Here's the insane story of how I found a single bug that affected over half of all Fortune 500 companies."
When you hear that, that's kind of insane. I'm like, sorry, firstly, I'm just a 15-year-old doing some programming as a side thing.
Unless it's like the black hat divergent. It's like, I'm actually a Russian bot.
Yeah.
And it's like, I am 15-year-old hacker. Yep. At 15, I had Visual Basic. You could drag and drop buttons onto a very basic gray square, the classic Windows gray square, and then just add code to the button. It was like Lego for coding. That's as far as I got when I was like 15. I'm like, and I thought I was hot shit.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Code, like web and code and all that has grown so much in the past, however many years it was since you guys were 15.
YouTube.
YouTube. I mean, there's it's so much more accessible now. So.
I'm so old. We didn't have access to information. Yeah. I had to go to the library and borrow the computer.
Yes, this was pre-YouTube.
It was actually pre-YouTube.
Yeah.
So this is about Zendesk. So Zendesk, if anyone doesn't know, essentially they're like a customer service tool. A lot of companies hook up an email that connects to Zendesk, and when you send them an email to this support, usually it's support@company.com, those emails then get turned into tickets, which then companies can kind of triage and comment and reply and etc. And either they can do it or they can have an external third-party team managing their Zendesk. And it's a very big company. Daniel also, he said he was surprised that a lot of these companies rely on third-party tools like Zendesk for this ticket managing for support queries. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that would be the way to go?
I think it makes... I'm not surprised that a lot of companies use tools like Zendesk. It makes sense to me. If the amount of investment in building an in-house tool is... I don't think people realize how much your costs grow. Just having a development team of 10 engineers at the kind of salary that these enterprise, places pay, you're looking at, over $1 million a year.
Yeah.
When you can pay a fraction of that to have the tool immediately out of the box. In the long term, maybe you can end up paying more money, but you can also move to another tool. Like the flexibility to, if the tool isn't working for you and changing companies, you can't do that if you build it in-house. You're stuck with whatever the problems are.
Absolutely.
You also can't point at someone else and say, you made a mistake and now you owe us for the issue. If you build it in-house and there's a bug, you can't take someone to court over that.
Yeah.
Not that I'm promoting that kind of behavior, but do you know what I mean? Like it makes a lot of sense for an enterprise company, once you reach a certain scale, to outsource that kind of functionality.
So the weakest link. As the saying goes, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So since Zendesk is just seen as a basic ticketing tool, companies have often set it up without much thought. The common setup is forwarding all support emails, so support@company.com to Zendesk. Why is this dangerous? Well, a lot of companies use their @company.com domains for single sign-on, SSO, which lets employees quickly log into internal tools. And by connecting Zendesk to the same domain, companies unknowingly create a potential security gap. Zendesk handles all emails for the domain it's configured for, which means if your single sign-on system doesn't properly validate email addresses, anyone who can gain access to your Zendesk could potentially exploit this and access your internal systems. So, and he goes on to start talking about email spoofing. And I think this is the big part of this. Email spoofing, is becoming harder to do.
So the idea is that basically you can add yourself to the CC list for any ticket if you're able to, write a script that can generate enough IDs that you'll eventually hit an ID that's actually a real ticket, and you can be included on any seemingly internal discussions. Right? That's the weakness that he's raising here.
So for those who don't know, what is email spoofing?
Acting as another email, right? When you send an email that looks like another email.
So when you're pretending to be something else.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Or somebody else.
Yeah. Spoofing emails used to be a lot easier. I think nowadays a lot of them are connected to some sort of domain that has to be verified, etc. Do you guys know much about spoofing in general?
Not on like a mechanical level.
Yeah.
I understand the intent, right? Because people spoof phone numbers, for example. They can call you from a number and it'll show up on your phone and say like NAB, that your bank is calling you. I don't know. I don't fully understand exactly how you spoof. The idea is that as far as you're concerned as a user and even as a system is concerned, you're a fully legitimate email.
That's right. So here's how it worked. So when you send an email to a company's Zendesk support portal, so support@company.com, Zendesk creates a new support ticket. To keep track of the email thread, Zendesk automatically generates a reply to address, which looks like support plus ID at company.com, where the ID is a unique ticket number. This address ensures that any future replies you send to go directly to the same ticket. Zendesk also has a feature for ticket collaboration, so if you CC someone on one of the email replies, Zendesk will automatically add them to the ticket, allowing them to then see the full history of the ticket. So the exploit is if an attacker knew the support email address and the ticket ID, they could use email spoofing to impersonate the original sender, send a fake email to the support plus ID email, CC'ing their own email, and then Zendesk would think it was a legitimate email, and it would then add the attacker's email to the ticket, giving them full access to the entire ticket history. That meant an attack could effectively join any ongoing conversation and read sensitive information, all because Zendesk didn't have a proper safeguard against email spoofing. Could certainly be dangerous.
Especially if you automate this, right? Because if you just say, oh, well, if it's an individual doing it manually, it's like, well, it's kind of less of a risk. But when you think about the kind of potential bad actors out there, automating it and being able to like mass on scale pull all that information out.
And the controversy around this isn't the exploit in itself. Exploits happen. That's exactly what these bug bounties are.
Yep.
Have you guys ever joined bug bounties or been a part of them?
I mean, I've participated in exercises where you're trying to basically do the same kind of stuff that a bug bounty is trying to do. We run them at SEEK here for us to be able to like learn and understand what hackers are trying to do so we can build more secure software.
Yeah.
But I haven't actively in my own free time participated in a bug bounty.
No, I've never actually tried to participate in a bug bounty program.
Typically, they are set up on a website, but they have rules that you have to comply to be able to receive the award. So if you typically you would
use an email address that has bug bounty 101 in the handle, so that if we're looking at our logs and we're getting smashed, we can see, oh, this person's trying to DDoS us. It's a bug bounty person. They're not malicious. They're just trying to get in.
Yes.
Block that email.
That's right. And they have, they also, so when you find a bug, I think you post it, and then that can come up with some sort of monetary gain you can get for finding the bug, I think. Is that
Companies will have flat fees, depending on the scale. I think, I don't know what SEEKs are exactly, but as just a random company A, they might give you $5,000 for a certain level of security, but then $10,000 if it's like complete system takeover, that kind of stuff. So there's scales, and some companies will pay a lot of money, and other companies will pay very little.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the idea is that when you find a vulnerability, you tell that company, and they should hopefully pay you back.
Yeah.
Yes. So depending on the severity of the bug, you can get paid more, and so that's why a lot of people do these bug bounties, trying to find really terrible bugs and just getting paid for it in their free time. Look, it could be another side project.
You can make a living.
You can make a living doing this, very much
absolutely.
so. So the controversy is Daniel ended up sending this to Zendesk, of course, saying this is the bug, and they replied saying, "Thank you for your submission. Unfortunately, this particular issue you reported is explicitly out of scope in our policies. So SPF, DKIM, DMARC issues are out of scope.
Which are, I think those are email spoofing methods.
Yes, and this is actually what I find very interesting because we're not going to do anything, I guess. Specifically, email spoofing is out of scope, but I think regardless, this is a pretty serious thing that hackers could exploit.
As we will soon find out.
So because the bug relied on email spoofing, they said it was out of scope, and he wasn't very happy with that.
They've basically accepted, well, this is my interpretation, that they've accepted the risk of email spoofing, that the level of access is not enough of a risk for them to, be worthy of paying someone out or dealing with the issue. For whatever reason, they've made that decision.
And this reply wasn't from Zendesk themselves. A lot of companies use an external company for bug bashes and stuff like that. And so this one was by a service called HackerOne that they triaged it and replied back. He wasn't happy, so he did keep replying, and he got another reply back from HackerOne staff, and they said, while we acknowledge that the ability to gain unauthorized access to support tickets is a serious matter, Zendesk's policy explicitly lists those SBF, blah, 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 issues as under bounty ineligible issues. Since the root cause of this vulnerability involves email spoofing by bypassing those email authentication protocols, it falls squarely into the exclusion list. They say, I understand your perspective that the potential impact makes this a high-risk vulnerability, regardless of the prerequisite. However, bug bounties program have to draw a clear line somewhere. I don't know. Does that feel like a good enough reply to you guys?
Without being a security expert, I guess it's hard to say. I would be interested to have this conversation with some of our security engineers. But I mean, just from the wording that they're using, right? Like, they have to put scope on bug bounty. Otherwise, any bug anyone finds, they could argue that they deserve payment.
Yeah.
Whereas, so like the idea of bug bounty is, I think I would imagine on some level we're contractually obligated because we've opened up this thing and said, as long as you adhere to these things, we'll pay you. And because we've made that agreement, I imagine people could find a bug, and as long as it's within scope, they could demand that we pay them. To stop, I guess it would be to stop companies from, stiffing people on the bug bounty payment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would imagine. I mean, it seems to me like if someone brings something that is very, very high risk and out of scope, there'd be some kind of, wow, you did a great job. You found something that's potentially a huge issue.
Some sort of acknowledgement.
Because getting full access to a ticket's history, theoretically, then you could get access to all the tickets.
Oh,
right?
People could share passwords in the ticket thing. Like not every company is as fastidious about what they include in what they think is internal communications.
Yeah.
And this is why we always say, like, you only transfer critical information over critical systems you can trust. Anyone who's done even a little bit of work in security probably would be able to tell you that like a large part of security penetration is social engineering.
Yeah.
It's how do you get access to the person's information so that you can log on as them and start doing stuff. Like, you're not even hacking into the system, you've just got their credentials.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I find this so fascinating, because if someone has access to what most people will think is internal communications, there is no limit to what you could get from that level of access.
That's true.
It just takes one person not thinking about what they're doing and sharing some critical credentials.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely it.
You get 10 minutes with access to an enterprise AWS account, you can do some damage.
Daniel did want to try and make this a bigger thing. He could have just told the individual companies that they were affected, because it was possible to patch this simply by turning off the collaboration function. So when you CC someone in and they get added to the ticket, you can turn that feature off.
Interesting.
So simply turning that off would stop attackers being added to ticket and seeing the ticket history.
Sure.
But apparently he wanted to make a bigger impact. Yeah, so he came across this blog post called Ticket Trick. In it, a security researcher found that he could infiltrate the private Slack workspaces of hundreds of companies. The way he could do that is because a lot of companies have their Slack SSO set up to the same domain name, so at company.com. And he found out that he could complete email verification through a support at company.com, gaining access to these private Slack channels. And back then, Zendesk wasn't as big, and there were some bugs that allowed anyone to view ticket history. But Daniel has realized that he could replicate this exploit using this bug, simply by creating an email and sending the Slack workspace verification to that support email, and then he can get that verification link because he then has access to the ticket history.
That's kind of wild. I mean, firstly, like that feels like an issue with your Slack setup too. Like if I can essentially make a new account knowing your workspace URL, and then I've got a valid account at your domain, I just have access by default. Like that kind of seems like a flawed system anyway.
Yeah. So after the exploit came about years ago, Slack changed the email verification system to include a random token in the email address. This meant you couldn't, so they would have like a no reply dash like random token at slack.com. This would mean so you can't just like get access to the, it means you wouldn't know what the Slack email no reply address is, right? However, some emails don't do that. So while Slack uses a random email token when sending email verification, neither Google or Apple did. Slack supported both of those methods for OAuth login. So it was the most simple bypass. Slack introduced OAuth login just a few years ago and must have completely forgot about their protection against this type of attack. So the exploit was to create a Google account with a support@company.com email, request a verification code, use the bug that he's found to access the ticket Zendesk automatically creates when it arrives, and then verify the Google account, log in with Google to attack. It was all perfect, except it wouldn't work with Google because Zendesk block no reply at Google emails, essentially. So if you were to send one of those to Zendesk, it wouldn't create a ticket. That's kind of the idea. So instead he did it with Apple and that worked.
So he's able to use Zendesk, the exploit with Zendesk, to get the verification email sent to Zendesk to use the CC to be able to actually click the button and approve the account.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Wild.
Well, this is how some of the more complicated exploits happen, right? It's an exploit on an exploit on an exploit, right? Like individually, that Zendesk thing, it was like, well, it's not good. And then you found out, oh, hey, now I can get into your company's Slack because of some other, like maybe poor security settings. The idea that I could be like, oh, I'm just going to go to some company.slack.com, click create new Apple ID, and then verify that email through whatever means. And then it's like, and now I'm in and I've got access to your Slack. Like, what? How is that a thing?
Yeah, so to reproduce these steps, it was essentially create an Apple account with a support@company.com, whatever company. With a support@seek.com, for example, right? And he'd request a verification code, and Apple then sends that verification code from apple.id at id.apple.com, whatever, to support@seek.com, for example. And so if we were using Zendesk, that verification code from Apple would be sent to that support email, and then it would create a Zendesk ticket. At the same time, create a ticket on company.com support portal from my own email address. This allows me to keep track of an ID range. Using the email spoofing bug I mentioned earlier to attempt to add myself to every ticket within that range. So because Zendesk uses incremental IDs for the no reply
You can just
email,
iterate 0, 1, 2, 3, up to
that's
a
exactly
million.
did. And so he created a ticket. First, he submitted a ticket to Zendesk using his own personal email to see what that ID was, to then get a range. And then, essentially he just set up a little loop with a ticket range. So 448 to 457. He knows it's somewhere in between there. And then he would just send an email from the Apple ID at apple.com to the support ID and CC'd himself onto that ticket, and was just essentially just brute forced himself to try and get himself CC'd onto there.
So he'd be on all of them, and then he'd have to just filter through each of them until he finds the email he's looking for.
Pretty much. Yep, exactly. And then he would log into the company.com support portal from his HackerOne account, and he could then view the CC'd ticket. And then he would see the verification Apple ID code, essentially.
And then you've got that, you verify your account and you're in.
Yeah, enter the verification code in Apple, and then use Slack's login with Apple feature and log in with an Apple account connected to the company's email address. And then apparently after that, he did do that for a couple large companies. He didn't say the name of any of them. And was actually able to collect bounties from those individual companies rather than Zendesk himself. He said within a month, he was able to make $50,000+ from bounties.
Wow.
Which I assume that's US.
Same. Which is wild, right?
Yeah, I imagine that the reason that spoofing wasn't on their bug bounty is because in their mind, and again, this is just pure speculation, in my mind, that kind of vulnerability is only going to get you access to things so long as you are mistakenly sending information across that communication channel, right? So like if no one's talking about anything private, if no one's sharing passwords, if no one's sharing critical information, API keys or anything like that, then they haven't really got anything except now this, right? So I imagine on the surface, they're like, well, why we shouldn't need to worry about spoofing because our customers just don't send critical information and you'll be fine.
I mean, it is a risk, right? And the spoofing example that's on this document, it's literally using, it looks like JavaScript and it's using an NPM package send mail. So it's not, doing anything fancy. It's just saying, the person who sent this email was Apple. And so, if you opened up your email receiving that, you'd be like, oh, Apple sent me an email. So the email spoofing in itself is not a complex attack.
I don't think that they were anticipating someone could use it as a way to get access to a different platform.
Yeah.
And this is why we always do like separation of concern, right? Like you don't want to put your things in the same account. You want to try and keep things as separated and isolated as possible and use good security policies to give things cross-account access, that kind of stuff. Because if someone gets access to one thing, because if something gets access to one thing, you just want to make sure it's the tiniest surface area for them to access. And because you don't realize how many hops people can make and how quickly they can hop from one vulnerable system to another.
Absolutely. Well, that's the scary thing is when you have one vulnerability and it's like that by itself isn't a problem. But when you stack up the fact that these 100 things all have one vulnerability and you can chain them together, suddenly you just do wild things.
I think this guy did the right thing.
Also 15, like, wow, dude, that's amazing. So
that's wild.
Yeah.
I wish I had $50,000 when I was 15. That's crazy. Hell, I could take 50 grand extra now for doing some bug bounties.
I don't need to be 15.
Regardless of the age.
So the massive props to you, Daniel, firstly. From an ethical standpoint, I think the idea that reporting that to the companies, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was a really good kind of moral and ethical thing to do. To be like, hey, especially with such a simple fix, to just be like, just turn off this thing and you've mitigated that risk.
How demoralizing would it be as a 15-year-old finding something that like you're like, oh, I can do some damage here.
Yeah.
And then a multi-billion-dollar company. Sorry, it's just not within the bounds of what we consider to be a bug.
Yeah. You know what would have been really crazy? Would have been if he'd gotten access to Zendesk's Slack.
Yep.
That would have been like the real...
It's worse for them because it's their customers, right? Like for us, like obviously that would be bad, but we're not... Like the relationship that we have with customers is very different to what Zendesk has.
Yeah.
Like our customers aren't necessarily integrated into our system. So we're not, they give us private information. We got to make sure that we protect that. But we're not going to give a black hat hacker access to someone else's code. They're not going to be able to do damage to someone else's systems because that's not how our relationship works.
Yeah.
Zendesk, I feel like, took a huge risk not addressing this immediately.
Yeah.
Well,
apparently it took 2 months for them to fix up.
2 months, damn.
Clearly, unsurprisingly, Zendesk didn't come out looking this very good. At least one or two companies reported cutting ties with Zendesk after the disclosure, which is, pretty insane, canceling their agreements altogether.
And the reason being that they didn't pay out a bug bounty in the end, despite acknowledging it and fixing it 2 months later. They didn't pay out a bug bounty.
No.
Because Daniel broke the disclosure guidelines by sharing the vulnerability with the affected companies.
That's exactly right.
That's wild.
Yeah.
They say we can't give you any money for this bug because
we can't.
broke the rules.
Our hands are tied.
Yeah. Is that not...
That's wild.
That is wild. I mean, he certainly made a lot of money off it already. And, maybe someone there was like, well, he's made money already. We don't need to pay him more. Surely, I don't know, but it doesn't feel right.
No.
No.
You want to be promoting good behavior, right? Like you want white hat hackers to get rewarded. And this feels like the opposite of that. He had to take it to other companies that paid him out for something that was not their vulnerability.
What's particularly interesting is that he found the first vulnerability, reported that vulnerability, and then escalated it. But it sounds like, if I'm reading the article correctly, he didn't report the then Slack vulnerability, which I wonder...
I don't think that's
I
what
wonder
happened.
if he'd reported that one, if that would have then been like, hey, this is actually a much bigger deal.
That's right. He said he didn't report the Slack vulnerability because at the time he didn't know about it. It wasn't until he wanted
He'd
to
already reported and they said no, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to then make an impact, and then he started digging into it, and then found that he could then, exploit Slack with it.
Which I can kind of get from a point of it's like, okay, so I've reported this thing. Clearly, you don't think it's bad enough. How can I make it bad enough for that to be a thing. And then, if you found, hey, it's really bad, and you're like, well, yeah, 15-year-old me probably out of spite would have absolutely just been like, yeah, stuff you, I'll go tell the companies and try and get them to pay me. But I do wonder if he'd gone to Zendesk and been like, actually, your problem's so much worse because I can do this thing here. I wonder if he'd reported that if they would have said the same thing. Because if they still said the same thing,
surely, right?
Then I'd be like, absolutely, go and tell the companies directly. Because if you say you can get access to my company's private Slack through some separate vendor, I'm going to be concerned.
Yeah, I think like if you're a company as big as Zendesk and someone comes to you and says, you have this vulnerability, the one that he found, the fact they said no and then he went and he's like, oh, fine, I'll exploit it then. I'll exploit the vulnerability and I'll take it to other people to get bug bounties from that. I feel like that's the natural like outcome.
Yeah.
That seems like a totally reasonable 15-year-old reaction.
Yeah.
Even as an adult, like that seems like a perfectly reasonable reaction. It's like, well, I'm going to do the right thing and tell the people who are going to be affected.
Yep.
I'm going to prove that it does things and I'm going to go tell them.
Well, because that's it. Because you've taken there's vulnerability, and you've said, actually, here's how bad I can make it. Right? And maybe it could have made it worse with other things.
Because the exploit didn't change. So, like,
yeah.
I don't think that I think it would be a reasonable assumption that if he goes back there, they would say, this is the same exploit. You're just showing us how it can be used.
Yeah.
So the same statement is true. By the way, we've got this problem we need to fix. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they came back to him as soon as customers started mentioning his name and saying this person's reporting that they found this exploit. And then they said, can you please expand on what this exploit is and how you're like what you're doing with it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they did like reach back out to him to figure out how they were doing this. Not only did he, exploit these companies, but also has the balls to be like, hey, also, can you give me money for this? Like, is that like as a 15-year-old, me just being like, holy shit, I just hacked into this company and telling them to fix it felt huge. Yeah. But there must be like a formal way of saying that politely to be like, hey, I found a bug. Can you please pay me?
Probably because they have like a process, right? Like there's an email you're supposed to email to say, hey, I found a bug, here's my bug. And a report process, like, give us all the details of the bug, the repeatable, like how do we reproduce the bug, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they come back and say no. Like, well, he didn't seem to go any further at that point. He just emailed again and said, are you sure? And he went, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, hey?
That's really, really impressive though, I got to be honest, for a 15-year-old to do. That's really, really cool. And I think he clearly did it. It sounds like he did it from I'm going to see if I can. It wasn't to be malicious. It was just, I'm going to see if I can hack into this thing.
This is the kind of exploit you could sit on for a very long time, gather a lot of information, and then take action, and then suddenly blackmail unfathomable like Apple.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's exactly right. Yeah, huge companies.
That's what I find wild about this is, we know that this is obviously a big issue. Like he made $50,000. That's huge, but someone with malicious intent could have exploited this in a much bigger way. I think the kid did the right thing.
Yeah, I think rounding this out, this was certainly very interesting. This is not the first bug bounty that he's made a blog post on. If you want to find out more about him, his Twitter is @HackermonDev, and he's also got another article about how he stumbled upon a Discord server and left with a $4,000 bounty somehow. Maybe that's another one we can cover. But when does that line eventually cross? When does someone find a bug so big they turn from a good guy to a bad guy? Topic for another time, but this was SEEK Bytes. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks for joining me on this one, Elliot and Seamus.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you, Will.